Welcome to Live with Anton Gunn. It is 9 a.m. East Coast time, earlier in the morning, 6 a.m. Pacific time. And to my followers and new fans across the pond, I think it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the UK. I want to welcome you to Live with Anton Gunn this week. And I want to continue talking about something that is getting more and more present in the minds of most Americans. And that is, we have a presidential election coming up. As a matter of fact, we're literally only 82 days from the next presidential election. And you can imagine for you and for all of the people who work for you that their minds are increasingly focused on this election. It's always high stakes with a presidential election, but this year it can feel a lot more high stakes. But I want you to know that every cycle, your employees will start thinking more and more about the presidential election. They'll be thinking about how it impacts them, how it impacts their family, how it impacts their pocketbook, how it impacts their community, how it's going to impact their life. And the more that the news plays story after story, conversation after conversation, insight after insight, report after report, every time something happens in this election cycle, people are going to pay attention to it. And they're not just going to pay attention to it when they're at home, they're going to pay attention to it at work. Another aspect of this is that you may have employees that when they are not working for you, they are volunteering their time to help a particular candidate or a campaign. There are a lot of people who volunteer on campaigns. Now, I'm giving you this perspective as someone who is a former campaign worker or a campaign staffer for Barack Obama when he was running for president. We had thousands of volunteers. And these were people who came from everyday walks of life, who many times were just citizens who voted, but they were inspired by our campaign. They was inspired by the candidate that they decided to get involved. And when they got involved, they would spend their nights and their weekends making phone calls, knocking on doors, making signs, putting door hangers together, even cooking food for the staff who worked on the campaign. They volunteered their time. So we became an important part of their lives outside of work. The same way some people work for you all day, but they might work in ministry as a pastor or a layperson, or maybe they're a youth softball coach or a youth basketball coach. These things become an important part of their lives outside of work, which means they don't take it off when they come into work the next day. And what do I mean they don't take it off? I'm telling you right now that as we approach this presidential election, your employees will start to talk a lot more about politics at work. They're going to talk about it. They can't help but to talk about it because it's going to become an ever-present thought in the impact on the workplace. And I've been on television a lot in the last 2 or 3 weeks talking about political tension in the workplace, how that can make employees feel, how people might react. And I'm trying to keep people focused on understanding how not to lose your organizational culture to the throes of a presidential election or any election for that matter. I don't want you to lose your culture. I don't want you to lose your people. I want your team to stay productive. I want you to stay focused on the main thing, which is you all are there to do a job. But I want you to know right now that this presidential election is having an impact on your employees. It is having an impact on their mindset. I want to focus on mental health. And the reason why I'm doing that is that I want you to know that some of you may know this, others you may not. I am a master level social worker. That's right. I have a master's degree in social work from the University of South Carolina College of Social Work. And in that degree program for 2 years, I learned about every aspect of how people engage at an individual level, at a family level, at a group level, at a community level, or organizational level, and a policy level. So I understand the human experience across the board. So I want to give you some context of what you need to do, what you need to be prepared for as we move through the next 82 days of this election cycle. And the first thing I want you to understand is the following, is that your employees' mental health can and will be impacted by this election. Can and will be impacted. So let me give you an example of some signs of things that you need to look for that could be going on with a member of your team or could be going on in your workforce overall. Number one is stress and anxiety. See, in every election, it's high stakes because it's win or lose. It's, win or take all, kill or be killed, whatever term you want to use. It's high stakes. And if you have employees who candidate is losing in the polling data, or they feel like that they may not be successful, that can create a level of stress and anxiety by employees who support that candidate. I'm just telling you, it is. It doesn't matter who the candidate is. There's going to be some level of stress and anxiety. That's what you can look for. The second thing you can look for is that people are going to get emotionally exhausted. And when I mean emotionally exhausted, they're going to be sick and tired of talking about the election or thinking about the election or waiting for the next shoe to drop or waiting for the next mistake for their candidate to make or waiting for this or waiting for that. I mean, like, we literally had an assassination attempt just a month ago. And I'm telling you right now, there are people who are emotionally exhausted looking at footage and looking at the video or talking about it. Like, there's so much emotional exhaustion that goes on around elections. And you need to be aware that this is what your employees are focused on and what they're dealing with. Now, let's also take it to the next level of what your employees are going to be concerned about. Does your company have a position on the election? Does your company have a candidate that they prefer? Now, when I say does your company have a candidate that you prefer, I'm not saying that you're getting involved in elections as a company. You may or may not be. But what I'm saying is, are you saying in the workplace, well, if this candidate wins, it's going to be good for our business. But if this candidate wins, I might have to lay you off. Or if this candidate wins, we may have to cut this whole division. If this candidate wins, we may not be as successful as a business. There's some organizations who know that depending on which candidate gets in office and their policies and their practices and how they roll them out, they could be good for business or they could be bad for business. And I want you to know that your employees are paying attention to what you're saying or not saying. And because of that, it can decrease their job satisfaction. That if they think that, I don't really like this candidate at all, but my boss is saying it's good for business, but that might make me question, is this a place where I really want to be working? Or it could be the opposite, that my boss is saying that if this candidate loses, it's going to be bad for business, but I really like that candidate. I really like that candidate, and I don't really see how it's going to be losing, but if my boss thinks it's going to be bad, then maybe this ain't the place for me. Maybe this ain't where I need to be working. So yes, the mental health aspect of the presidential election is going to have an impact on your employees. So it could affect their well-being, their productivity, their morale. It could affect your outcomes. It could affect quality of the products and services that you produce. Like, your customer experience could go down because your employees are being impacted by the election. They could be. So I want to help you to prepare for this very briefly. I'm going to give you 4 strategies, 4 things to think about, things that you need to know, things that you really need to be aware of that could have an impact on your employees. And most importantly, I'm going to give you some things to think about, some things that you can do to counteract those, or to at least be aware of them. And some of them you'll be able to address. So let's jump right in. So here are the 4 things that you need to know that could affect your employees' well-being from this presidential election, how political tension could affect your employees' well-being. So number 1, you need to recognize the signs and symptoms of stress. You need to recognize them. You got to know if people are feeling that exhaustion, if they're showing anxiety, if they're showing any of these things, you got to find a way to pay attention to them. So number 1, here's a sign that everybody should be looking for. Do you have some employees who used to be really engaged, like actively engaged? They were bubbly at work. They were always in on every conversation or ready to jump in to help people. But all of a sudden they start to withdraw. You don't see them show up as much. They do the bare minimum at work. Or maybe they're starting to express some irritability, that they're easily frustrated whenever the conversation turns to politics, that they easily get irritated. That's a sign that you need to pay attention to. A second sign is, are people having physical issues? Like, are they having headaches? Are they more fatigued? Are they coming in and saying, oh, I'm just exhausted. I'm so tired. I'm just going to tell you now that they could be staying up hours upon hours at night watching news stories about this candidate, documentaries about this candidate. They can't get enough of the news, and that's making them fatigued at work. They might have stress headaches or migraine headaches. They could have all kinds of stuff going on because of what is going on with the election cycle. So you need to be paying attention to that. Now, here's another sign. Are people being on sick leave more? Are they out sick? You seeing more absenteeism for people? People losing focus? They're lacking productivity. Their productivity numbers are down. If you see any of those things, it could be some sign of stress and fatigue that could be brought on by how the political tensions or the election is showing up in your workplace. You just got to pay attention to it. You totally got to pay attention to it. It's a sign that's right there in front of you. So number 1, recognize the signs and the stress of political tension in the workplace. The second thing you need to do, if you see these signs in your employees, if you feel like any of this stuff is going on, then you got to provide some resources and support to counteract these signs. So what do I mean? Some companies do have counseling services that are available for their employees. Now, if you don't, I'm not telling you got to build in some counseling services, but you might want to build a resource list of counseling services around your physical location or around the location where your employees live. You want to provide some level of support for them. Give them something that could help them to navigate these difficult waters, because sometimes people can't process what's real and what's not real. They see stuff happen politically and it just consumes their lives, and they need somebody to process that with. Another thing you should have as a part of your benefit package is employee assistance programs. These are programs that are designed to help employees navigate these difficult waters. So you got to have some employee assistance programs in place, and most of you do. You just got to make sure your employees are aware of them and know how to use them. And then the third thing you want to think about is implementing some wellness programs. So when I say wellness programs, I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can do it, but let's just say you put in a program on stress management. You put in a program around collegiality in the workplace, or how to have difficult conversations, any kind of program to talk about the things that's raising the stress level in your employees, and your job is to lower that stress level. That's what I want you to do, is to provide some resources and some support. That's the second thing. And then the third thing is, I want you to refocus on your work environment. You need to provide a supportive work environment. That means promoting respect in the workplace. That means giving people safe spaces to have the conversation, build an inclusive environment where everybody, regardless of their political opinion or their perspective, how they voted last election, it don't matter how they did. You want to create some supportive, safe spaces in your work environment for people to express themselves. You as a leader need to encourage open communication about these things. Don't necessarily say, you know what, we can't talk about that at work. I'm going to tell you, that's a huge mistake. I'll never forget in 2008, after Barack Obama won the presidency, employers sent an email out on November 5th. Nobody is to talk about the election at work. Now, you had half of your workforce who is elated and excited that Barack Obama won, and you had half of the workforce who is upset that Barack Obama won. And so employers said, you know what? We're just going to tell nobody to talk about the election in the workplace, not recognizing that to half of the people, by saying that, you have silenced them at work. You told them that they are not allowed to be happy or supportive that we elected a new president, that we elected the first African-American president, and that we elected a candidate that inspired a lot of people the world over. You just silenced them. Now, why is that bad? Because you just told those employees, we don't support you here, that we don't want to hear from you, that your opinion doesn't matter, that your excitement doesn't matter. That was a mistake to send that email out. And I know it because so many of our volunteers who worked at organizations called us the day after the election and told us what people were saying at work, that we're not allowed to talk about the election. We're not allowed to do this. We're not allowed to do that. I don't think I want to work here. And yes, some of those companies lost some of their top employees. They really did. They lost the good people. So you need to be mindful to build a supportive environment at work. And you need to create some open communication around the election. This is before the election. Some open communication around the issues that matter to you in your workplace. Not every issue. So you may not have to talk about guns or abortion every day, but you may want to talk about tax policy, or you may want to talk about the CHIPS Act and what it might mean for innovation in your company. Like, you just got to figure out the fit and create open communication channels, Slack channel, open forums, different things that you can do to inspire good communication around what people's feelings are about this election. That's number 3. Now, here's the last one, and I'm going to be real brief on this one, is that you need to implement some stress management initiatives. I'm talking everything from workshops on how to manage stress and how to focus on your well-being, how to focus on your mental health, to actually bringing in people who can do wellness programs like yoga and fitness challenges and, mental health days. These are things that you could do to implement stress management practices to keep people's tension down during this election year. The third thing that I would tell you, and this is really important, and this third thing actually is a safe space. Number 1, it lets people know you're building an inclusive environment. Number 2, it supports the respect for differences and the differences in the people in your organization. And that is to establish or support your employee resource groups. I know you have employee resource groups. Some of you, many of you may not, but you might want to establish some employee resource groups that are safe spaces for your LGBTQ plus employees, for your African-American employees, for your Latinx employees, for your women that work in your organization. Create some safe spaces for the different groups of people in your organization by creating employee resource groups where people can talk about what they're experiencing and what they're feeling, that they can help express themselves, which helps you to manage the stress. So that's what I got for you. These political tensions have the ability to erode your culture, to make your employees physically sick, emotionally sick, for them to check out of work and quit, or worst case scenario, be disruptive at work. So you need to know the signs around stress and anxiety, around emotional exhaustion, around decreased job satisfaction. If you see any of those signs, here are 4 quick strategies for you to work on to prevent this from overtaking your organizational culture. Number 1 is to just know the signs of stress. What does it look like? Withdrawal, irritability, and all of those things. Pay attention to. The second thing is provide some resources and support for the people who might be feeling that. Number 3, make sure your culture and your work environment stays overarching supportive of your employees. It stays inclusive. It stays open in terms of communication. And then the 4th thing is to implement some stress management programming. You do these 4 things, it'll help you to navigate the next 82 days for your workforce. So I appreciate you all jumping on, watching this episode of Leadership Live with Anton Gunn. I hope it's added some value to you and how you lead or manage the human capital function in your organization. And I'll see you next week, same bat time, same bat channel for LinkedIn Live or Leadership Live with Anton Gunn. Have a great day.